I never thought I would survive to tell this story. What I saw, what I endured, and what others went through in that place. It's not something that can be forgotten. This isn't just a story. It's a wake-up call, a cry for justice, and a warning for every innocent person looking for a better future. I'm here not just to recount what happened, but to make sure no one ever falls into the same trap again. It all started with what seemed like a golden opportunity. I was struggling to find work, like so many others in my town. Bills were piling up, and I was watching my mother get older, sicker, and more worried with each passing day. So when I heard about a job offer through a friend, something well-paid, safe, and immediate out in Jalisco, I didn't hesitate. They said it was in agriculture, something like seasonal work with lodging and meals included. For a young guy like me, with no university degree and no stable connections, it sounded like a lifeline. I remember the excitement on my mother's face when I told her. It was the first time in a long while she looked hopeful. I packed quickly and left the next morning. The journey there was ordinary, almost too calm in hindsight. I was picked up in a white van by a man who introduced himself as Carlos. He was friendly, cracked jokes, made us feel at ease. There were 7 of us in that van, all young men around my age, each with the same desperation in their eyes. Some were fathers, some barely adults, but we all shared one thing. We believed this job was going to be our big break. The van had tinted windows and we weren't allowed to open them. That struck me as odd, but no one said anything. We were too eager, too hopeful to question it. That's how false promises work. They blind you. When we arrived, we weren't taken to a farm like we expected. Instead, it was a remote property surrounded by wire fences and thick woods. There were no fields, no crops, just a large compound with broken-down buildings and a sickening silence. That's when it hit me. Something was wrong. We were told to leave our phones and IDs in a metal box by the gate for safekeeping. If someone resisted, they were yelled at or slapped. Fear started to seep in, but it was too late to turn back. We were ushered into a barrack-style building, handed identical clothing and told the rules. There was no job, no contract, no wages. We had just entered a living hell. The next few days were disorienting. We were kept in a cramped space with no light and fed once a day. We weren't allowed to speak. Guards, real cartel enforcers, watched us constantly, carrying rifles and machetes. At night, we'd hear screams. That's when I realized other people were already there before us. Some were being tortured. Others were taken and never seen again. It wasn't long before the guards came for us too. We were told we'd go through training, but this was no military boot camp. It was psychological warfare, sleep deprivation, beatings, mental games, and constant threats. We were forced to watch horrifying acts, men begging for their lives, young boys being punished just for crying. They called it breaking us. I wanted to believe that if I played along, stayed quiet, and followed orders, I'd survive. But every day blurred into the next, and the air became heavier with death. Some tried to escape. They were hunted like animals. And when they were caught, their deaths were used as lessons for us. This is what happens to cowards, the guards would say, pointing at mutilated bodies. I started losing sense of time, of self. I stopped dreaming. I stopped hoping. On the 5th day, we were taken to what they called La Escuelita, the little school. That's when it truly began. They divided us into groups, gave us weapons, and told us to fight. If we refused, they beat us. If we hesitated, they made us kill animals. Then they made us bury them. The goal was simple: to desensitize us, to make us numb to blood, pain, and suffering. The next level was worse. We were ordered to beat each other. Whoever hesitated was targeted next. It wasn't training, it was transformation. They were turning us into monsters like them, or they were trying to. I remember one night in particular. They made us kneel in front of a burning barrel, surrounded by the screams of the dying. One man next to me whispered, "Don't cry. If you cry, they'll feed you to the pigs." I thought he was being dramatic, until I saw it happen. A boy broke down, sobbed for his mother. They dragged him out. We never saw him again. The next day, one of the guards laughed and said, "He made good bacon." That's when the fear became something deeper. It wasn't just about dying. It was about losing your humanity before death even came. There was a man named Javier. I'll never forget him. He was around 30, a father of two, and had come from Michoacan after answering the same job that I had seen. We were put in the same training group and somehow formed a silent bond. He never spoke much, but his eyes said everything. On the 8th day, during a forced exercise in the yard, one of the guards struck him with a rifle butt for looking the wrong way. He fell, bleeding, and they left him there for hours under the sun. I remember crouching next to him at night, sharing the little water we had. He kept whispering the names of his children. That was the first time I truly felt helpless, not just afraid for myself, but for someone else too. The guards treated us like we were nothing. They called us carne nueva, fresh meat. It wasn't a nickname, it was a warning. We were disposable, replaceable, their property. They made us clean up the blood from the torture room, bury the remains of the ones who didn't survive the tests, and even dig our own future graves as a form of psychological control. Sometimes they would laugh as they made us perform absurd drills like crawling through barbed wire shirtless while being kicked. One guy, Luis, lost half his ear in the wires. They laughed harder. These weren't people, they were wolves, hungry for pain and dominance. One of the most terrifying experiences was when they forced us to stand in silence for hours while they played screams over loudspeakers. The screams weren't recordings, they were live. They came from a small cabin at the edge of the compound where some of the victims were taken for punishment. The guards called it La Casita del Infierno, the little house of hell. Sometimes if you disobeyed or hesitated during the drills, they would threaten to send you there. No one came back the same. One guy returned, eyes vacant, walking like a ghost. He didn't speak for days, just stared at the wall. When he finally opened his mouth, he mumbled, "They made me choose who died." We began to understand that this place was more than a training ground. It was a factory for killers. The ones who passed all the tests were promoted and sent off to different cities. Zacatecas, Michoacan, Guerrero, Guanajuato, like franchise branches of a deadly network. It was all structured, organized. Those who showed the most cruelty were celebrated. One guy was made a commander just because he didn't flinch while cutting someone's throat. That became the goal, to survive by losing your soul. But I clung to one thing: I wouldn't kill. I told myself that if I ever crossed that line, there'd be no coming back. I started to fake my responses. I pretended to obey, to submit, to be numb. But inside, I was planning. I didn't know how or when, but I had to get out. Some nights, I'd listen closely for guard rotations. I'd memorize the layout, the shadows, the weak spots in the fencing. Every movement I made was calculated. I watched others try and fail. I learned from their mistakes. I learned which guards were lazy, which ones drank, and which ones bragged too loud. But the biggest risk wasn't being caught. It was being turned. Because the longer you're in hell, the more it starts to feel normal. Then came the day that almost broke me. A new batch of recruits arrived. Among them was a boy who couldn't have been older than 15. His name was Marcos. He was skinny, scared, and silent. He reminded me of my younger brother. I tried to protect him without being obvious, shared what little food I had, gave him warnings when guards were coming. But it wasn't enough. During a drill, he collapsed from exhaustion. They dragged him away. The next time I saw him, he was lying in a wheelbarrow, bloody and unconscious. He didn't survive. That was the moment I stopped believing in hope. All I had left was rage and the need to make it out alive. For him, for Javier, for everyone. There were rumors that some had escaped. Whispers passed from bunk to bunk in the dead of night. One name kept coming up: Eduardo. They said he broke free and made it to the city, that he had told authorities, that he was the reason some families knew about the ranch. I didn't know if it was true, but it gave me just enough strength to keep going. That if he made it, maybe I could too. And if I did, I'd tell the world. I'd expose everything. Because what happened at that place, what's still happening, is too monstrous to be buried in silence. And silence is what they count on. I remember the night I made my decision. It was raining, just enough to mask footsteps, but not enough to soak the ground. One of the guards had been drinking heavily, and the others were too busy bragging near the fire pit to care. I'd memorized the gaps in the schedule. I waited until they switched shifts and used the storm as cover. I moved slowly, crawling under a broken panel behind the storage shed. I didn't run. I slithered like a snake, quiet, patient, terrified. My heart beat so loudly I thought it would give me away. But adrenaline took over. When I reached the fence, I used a rock to dig out the dirt underneath. The wire scratched me, tore my shirt, but I made it through. I ran for what felt like hours. My legs were weak from malnutrition, but fear was a better fuel than food. Every noise made me flinch. Every shadow could be death. I kept telling myself, don't stop, don't look back. When I finally reached a road, I collapsed in a ditch and covered myself with leaves, hiding until sunrise. A pickup truck passed, then another. I didn't dare wave. Who could I trust? What if the cartel had watchers on the road? Eventually, I found a small village and walked into the church. The priest looked at me like I was a ghost. Maybe I was. I asked for water and a phone. He gave me both, and for the first time in weeks, I cried. The authorities didn't believe me at first. I was dirty, gaunt, trembling, with no ID, and a wild story. But I showed them scars. I told them names, descriptions, locations. They started asking questions. I could see the change in their faces. Some looked scared, others skeptical. But there was one woman, an agent named Rodriguez, who didn't doubt a word. She took notes quietly, then made a call. Within hours, I was transferred to a safe location, given clothes, food, and protection. But it didn't feel like freedom. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Marcos. I heard the screams. I remembered the smell of burned flesh. Survival came at a cost. Weeks later, I was asked to testify, to give my account officially, to help build a case. I said yes without hesitation. If my story could stop just one more person from falling into that trap, it was worth reliving. I described the compound, the routines, the guards, the torture. I gave them the name of the recruiter, Carlos, the one who drove the van. I told them how they rotated victims, how they disguised the facility as a farm, how they recruited through job ads and fake promises. Everything I remembered, I gave them. I didn't care if the cartel found out. They had already taken everything. I had nothing left to fear. But the truth is, I do fear. Every day. I live with it like a shadow that never leaves. I changed my name, moved cities, avoided contact with people from my past. I don't trust easily. I don't sleep well. Loud sounds make me jump. Crowded places make me sweat. The trauma didn't disappear. It just learned to hide better. Some days I question if I did the right thing. Others I remember Javier's eyes, Marcos's voice, the girl who never came back from the cabin. I carry their memories with me like a duty. I'm alive because they died, and that's a truth I will never stop carrying. I've since met others like me, survivors, people who escaped the same nightmare or different ones. We form a kind of silent brotherhood. We don't need to speak to recognize each other. There's a look in the eyes, a tension in the posture, a shared understanding of what it means to lose everything and still keep walking. Some of us have testified. Some are too scared. Some have disappeared again, afraid the cartel will find them. I've helped a few write their statements, helped others go to the authorities. My life now is built on telling the truth, even if it shakes, even if my voice breaks. If you're hearing this or watching this, I want you to know, this is real. It's still happening. The cartel hasn't stopped, they just get smarter at hiding. But for every hidden place, there's a voice like mine that can expose it. We need to speak. We need to be louder than the fear, louder than the threats, louder than the silence. This isn't about revenge, it's about justice. For the mothers who never saw their sons again, for the fathers still searching fields with shovels, for the children buried in shallow graves. Justice won't bring them back, but it might stop the next one from disappearing. If you've made it to the end of this story, I want to thank you, not for listening to me, but for honoring the lives of those who were lost, for giving your time and heart to something most people would rather ignore. What happened at that ranch wasn't just cruelty, it was evil. And evil thrives in silence. But by listening, by remembering, and by sharing, you become part of something powerful. You become part of the resistance to that silence. I didn't survive just to survive. I survived to speak, to be a voice for the boys who never came home, the women who were erased, the parents still searching with broken hands and shattered hearts. Every time you share this story, you help push back against the darkness. Every time you talk about it, post about it, pray about it, You shine a light where others only see shadows. Don't underestimate that. Don't ever think your voice doesn't matter. Inscreva-se no canal e siga Jesus. Because in a world where cruelty runs deep, it is only through truth, justice, and faith that we can stand firm. My survival wasn't an accident, it was grace. And if you're watching this, maybe your purpose is tied to this message too. Maybe you're meant to do more than just witness. Maybe you're meant to act. Support the mothers who search. Share the names of the missing. Pray for the lost. And never, ever forget. I invite you to stay connected. This channel isn't about views or numbers, it's about truth. It's about building a family of people who care, who fight with compassion, and who dare to speak when others stay quiet. Subscribe, comment, share. Let's be a community that breaks the cycle of fear with courage. I'll keep telling these stories as long as you keep showing up. Together, we can make sure no one feels as alone as I once did. To those who have lost someone, my heart is with you. To those who have survived, you're not broken, you're brave. And to those who still hope for answers, don't give up. There's more light in this world than darkness, even when it doesn't feel that way. We will keep fighting for you. We will keep remembering, and we will not let them bury the truth. I'm grateful you're here. Really, you listening means more than you know. If this message spoke to your soul, don't keep it to yourself. Let it move you. Let it move others. Keep showing up, keep pressing in, and above all, stay human. Stay tender, even when the world tells you to go numb. Until next time, take care of your heart, protect your soul, and never forget those who can no longer speak for themselves. I'll be here, and I hope you will too.